Hello and welcome to Programming with Python. In our last session, we have looked at how Python works under the hood. Now, without any further ado, let's jump into what exciting stuff we can actually do using Python. So first of all, let's try to understand some basic stuff, right? So let's take a simple task of adding two numbers 5 and 12. So now if I want to add these two numbers 5 and 12, my first task is I have to store these values 5 and 12 in the memory, right? Because only when these values are in the memory, then I can perform some action on them, whether it be addition or multiplication or any other action, right? So the first thing is I have to store 5 and 12 in the memory. And the next thing is I have to access these values 5 and 12 in the memory, right? So how do I access them? So when I say these values are stored in the memory, they are stored in the memory at a particular address. And this address will be in the form of hexadecimal value. Hexadecimal value, right? So what is hexadecimal value? And if you want more details about it, I have provided a link and then you can go through it. So let's say the address of this value 5 is this, and let's say the address of where this value 12 is located is this, right? So now if I want to add 5 and 12, I should be able to keep track of this address, right? Once I know this address, so what I'll do is I'll access these values 5 and 12 from the memory, and then I will perform the addition using the plus operator, right? And then we get the desired output. Now if you look at this process, right, first we have to store the values in the memory, and then next you have to keep track of where these values are located, right? We have to keep track of the address, right? If you look at it, it's just a long and tedious process just for the addition of two numbers, right? So this problem can be resolved using a concept called as variables. Now let's look at how this problem can be solved using this concept. Let's take the same example of adding 5 and 12. So if I want to add 5 and 12, what I'll do is I'll create a variable called 5, and then I will assign the value 5 to it. So what happens in the background is that the value 5 will be will be stored in the memory, and then this variable a will point to the address of where this value 5 is located, right? So this is what happens when I use this variable, or when I use this statement a is equal to 5, right? And then next I want another value 12, right? So what happens is that the value 12 will be stored in the memory, and then this variable b will point to this address where the value 12 is located, right? Now if I want to access 5 and 12, all I have to do is access these variables a and b, right? Now if I want to do the addition operation, all I'll do is a plus b, right? So when I do a plus b, what happens is that this variable a, right, it points to this value, it points to this address where the value 5 is located. So I'll get 5, and then when I say b, this b will point to the value 12 where this is located, right? So it will be 12, so it will be 5 plus 12, I'll get the output as 17, right? So this is a now this has, so from long and tedious process to we just understood how variables makes it easy, right, to access the data. So to briefly put it, variables are used to store the data or the data values. Cool. Now let's head into code editor and let's see how we can actually do it, right? So we are talking about variables. So what I will do is, so same addition of 5 and 12. So firstly, I'll take a variable a and I will assign the value 5 to it, So now we understand the meaning of this statement, right? When I say a is equal to 5, the meaning of that is 5 will be stored in the memory, and then the variable a will point to the address where that value 5 is located, right? And then the next value 12, I'll assign it to b. And if I want to perform addition, all I have to do is a plus b. Cool. Now, what if I want to change the value present at that particular location? Now, what do I mean by that is, so now can I change the value present at this memory location using this variable a? Yes, for sure you can do it. Now let's say you have a equal to 5 and b equal to 12, and next if I were to write this statement a is equal to 100. So what happens here is that now a, right, a initially the value 5 is at this address, correct? Now when I say a is equal to 100, this value 5 will be replaced by the value 100 at this memory location. Now whenever I access a, I'll get this value 100. Right? So when I am accessing the variable, I am accessing whatever value is present in that memory location. And now that value could be changed very easily. So please keep that in mind. Now if I want, let's say if I want to change this value 12, right, at the location pointed by b, all I have to do is b is equal to, I can name some other value, let's say 14. Now in this memory location, instead of 12, the value will be 14, right? So far we have looked at how we can use variables, right? How we can use variables to store values in the memory and then to access the values in the memory. Now, if that is the case, so what are the different types of values that I can store in the variables? Can I store any type of values in the variables? So let's see about what are the different types of values that we can store within the variables. So firstly, you can store numbers. So in the numbers, I can store integers. So when I say integers, they are minus infinity to plus infinity, right? And then next up, I can store decimal numbers. They are called as float. And then I can store decimal numbers which are called as float or floating numbers in the programming language. So decimal numbers, by decimal numbers I mean, for example, 8.56 and so on. Right? And then next up, I can store complex numbers as well. So complex numbers, they are in the form of a plus bj, right? So where a and b are integers. So for example, I can store a complex number simply, right, 3 plus 5j by assigning it to any variable. Cool. Next, what more can I store other than numbers? Can I store the text values? Yes, you can. So we can store text values in the form of strings. Okay, in the form of strings. So what do we mean by it? If I want to store text value, what I have to do is, let's say my variable is a, I'll assign, so within the double quotes, I have to mention whatever the text that I want to store. Let's say good morning, right? So now the important part is you have to see that you have to enclose the text within the double quotes, right? If you see it, if you see here, there is double quotes around this text. So it's important to keep that in mind. So whenever you want to store text, you have to store it in double quotes and then assign it to a variable. And then this strings is an interesting concept because you can store numbers also in the form of string. Now what do I mean by it? So when I can store numbers in the form of strings, let's say this variable b, now within this double quotes, I'll write a number 8. Now, if you observe this, I'm storing an integer, right, 8, but I'm storing it in the form of a string. How? I am enclosing this value 8 within the double quotes, right? So whenever I enclose any value within the double quotes, it will become a string. It will act as string, it will not act as number, right? So now let's say if I have b is equal to 8 in the form of string, and let's say c is equal to 10 in the form of a string, right? Now if I want to perform, let's say, simple addition like 8 plus 10, if my expected result is 18, and if I do b plus c, right, what we think is, yes, b has the value 8 and c has value 10, so the expected value should be 18, correct? But that isn't the case. The reason why that is so is because the values 8 and 10, they are not stored in the form of numbers, they are, or integers, they are stored in the form of strings. And when the numbers are stored in the form of strings, if you do an addition, if you do this plus operator, this is not the same as 8 plus 10. So when we do an addition operation on strings, actually what happens is both of them, they get concatenated, that is, they get joined. So in this case, the output would be 8, 10. Both of these numbers will be joined or connected. They will not, the addition operation will not be performed, right? So just keep that in mind, that whatever the values that are stored within the double quotes, that will act as a string, right? And then there are there are multiple built-in data types within Python, like list, set, dictionary, tuple, and more. Now, what are these? Don't bother about them too much. We will learn about them as we progress further in this course, right? So for now, all you have to understand is variables are used to store data, or variables are used to store data values, right? And then using these variables, we can store different types of data. We can store numbers, we can store strings, which are text, correct? Now, let's look a bit more into these variables, right? So I told variables, right? So then so can I name these variables in any way I want to? Now, if you observe here, I have taken two variables, A and B, right? And then I have named these variables simply using the characters A and B. Yes, there are certain rules to be followed while naming these variables. So when you name the variables, they can be named using a single character, or you can give them a more descriptive name of what that particular variable is storing. Let's say, for example, you are storing the price of a particular product in a variable. Then you can name that variable as price underscore product, whatever is the product, and then I can store that particular price, right? So you can give it a more descriptive name as well, right? And then the other important thing is that when naming variables, you can use only letters or numbers or underscore. You cannot use any other special characters. So I can name a variable like p10, it is fine. Or I can name a variable p underscore fg34, right? I can have letters, I can have numbers, I can have underscores, but the name of the variable should not contain anything else. And one more important thing is, the name of the variable, it can start either with a letter or with an underscore, but not with a number. So the names of the variable should never start with a number, right? So these are the basic concept to keep in mind if you want to create some exciting stuff with Python. So in the next session, we will jump into more into this data types, and we'll see some exciting stuff as well. Thank you.